week's film.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, folks, welcome to the spoiler room. Thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair, and popping your favorite drink or a drink. I have a Seagram's Calypso Colada.
Ooh.
Ooh, a frou-frou drink, one that I haven't had for a while. So thank you out there, those who like to poke fun at my frou-frou drinks. But yes, this is a Perfect 10 special where we are covering a film each month that was released in 2013, celebrating its 10th anniversary, along with the spoiler room. These are the films that you voted on. I know last week's was also a 2013 film. Yes, okay, internet, I get it. But that wasn't voted on. It just fit the theme of this month, which is remote controlled. And with me today to look at the most interesting film. I tried to pick non-horror films, okay, folks, and it kind of is. Upstream Color from 2013 is the movie, and the man sitting next to me is my right-hand man. He keeps coming back for more. It is none other than Mr. Ian Simmons himself. Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to talk about this movie, which this is, I think, the third time I've seen it, and every time is different.
Really? Third time?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, this is my first time seeing it. So it was one of those to where it got a lot of buzz in 2013 when it came out, a lot of talk of people, for what it was. I just never got around to watching it because it didn't look like it was exactly my wheelhouse at the time. After watching it now, I don't think I would probably have received this film quite like I did now had I watched it 10 years ago because I'm more experienced. But at least I've grown more an appreciation for some cinema. Ed, who also has the appreciation, is my hand man here. And Ian, let's give us a synopsis here of Upstream Color. Go.
Yeah, Mark, I know I've been on this show for like 3 years. I still consider it your show. So one of these days, I'm going to work up the courage to say no. I'm going to turn it back around and you say, you do it.
If you'd like me to, I can. I just,
it's okay.
You do it so much better than me, though.
Well, thank you. I'm extremely tired. So, which is probably the perfect disposition with which to describe this movie.
I was going to say, yeah.
I'll just start off by saying I was going to watch like half this movie this morning and then half in the afternoon because I turned it on at like 4 a.m. and I got other things to do. But I watched the entire thing from beginning to end. I really do love this movie, and it's kind of unfortunate, probably because of some of the things we'll get into later tonight. But it is I'll just say it's the story of a woman named Chris, played by Amy Seimetz. And she works for some kind of like a special effects house, or I don't know if she's a producer or what, but we see her briefly at her job, like flipping through effects reels and trying to, I guess, find someone to step in for a commercial or a movie she's working on. But one day her life is upended when she is sort of low-key attacked, drugged by this guy on the street who slips her a pill, and this pill has a worm inside of it, and there's actually 2 capsules. I think he takes one and she takes the other, and it allows him to completely control her mind, like absolutely, to the point beyond fatigue, beyond hunger, beyond all reason. He convinces her to basically sign over every asset that she owns. He lives in her house for, I mean, it feels like a couple of months, and then he just decides to leave. He says, I'm going to leave and everything's going to go back to normally. I can remember anything, basically. And she does. She wakes up and she's completely devastated. She gets fired from her job because she hasn't shown up. No one believes what she's claiming happened to her. She goes to the bank. She's like, where's all my money? I didn't sign these checks. They show her the surveillance footage of her going into these places, making these withdrawals. So it's a big mystery what's going on. We, the audience, know what's going on because before I even meet Chris, we see these people cultivating these little grubs, and I see you're Mark the Grub Man tonight, so it's perfect.
I am.
They have these kind of mind control powers, these abilities to remote control people, as it were. And we follow the whole kind of harvesting process from the grubs to these plants to making pills, and then the effects of these pills. So Chris, when she comes out of it, she's, again, completely devastated, kind of lost. She meets a guy named Jeff, played by the writer-director of this film, Shane Carruth. And they kind of get to know each other, and they have the tense relationship and trust issues and all this other business. And they're trying to figure out what happened to her. And also, we come to realize that the same thing probably happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
There is a detail watching it this time that I didn't pick up on the first time. He is a disgraced a
Mm-hmm.
financier or a broker of some kind, and he apparently stole a bunch of money from people. Then he still works for the company that he had. Basically, he's paid under the table to do like low level jobs for them. This is the first time that it occurred to me that he probably didn't steal that money willingly. He was under the
Right.
effects of this drug. I hadn't put that together.
Mm.
Um, which is weird. You'd think that being awake at 4 o'clock in the morning would not make me susceptible to bright ideas. But,
Mhm.
yeah, and through the course of the film, we find out more about what these grubs are, who's cultivating them, and, see if the people we'll get into this in spoilers, who have been victimized by it, because there's a whole lot of people who've fallen prey to these grubs. Can they get justice?
Yeah, that
Upstream Color.
that's that is a good upstream color synopsis. And how did you feel about it when you first saw it? Did you just like it right away, or did it grow on you?
I loved it. And this is before I'd really gotten into, slow cinema. This isn't necessarily slow cinema, but it is very artsy, for lack of a better term.
Mm.
And it's one of those weird things where I watched this when it came out in 2013 or thereabouts. And that was the year that I had like a whole bunch of sleeping problems, which I'm kind of coming back full circle around to now. I was getting very little sleep, and I don't remember a lot from that period, especially when it comes to movies. I hate reading what I wrote about movies from back then, because I'm like, this is a crazy person. But it was on my wavelength. It was in my wheelhouse, as you like to say. I loved it. It was unlike a lot of things that I'd seen, and I thought Shane Carruth is one of my new favorite filmmakers. Then I watched Primer, I think a couple years later, which was his first film.
Mm-hmm.
That's got him a lot of acclaim, and I think I need to watch that again because I didn't quite get Primer like I got this one. And he had a
Yeah.
third film that he was supposed to come out with, but yeah, for many reasons that is still yet to be realized.
Primer was good. I enjoyed it. It was definitely different and quirky. Didn't realize at first that it was the same guy, because don't always pay attention to names involved in films. And this was my first time watch, and I dug it. I will say, when it first started, I'm like, okay, this is artsy. Like the first 5 minutes, you got to kind of get past the first 5-10 minutes where they're showing how they're cultivating from the plant, and they're pulling the grubs, and how he's doing the grubs where they're actually pouring liquid over the grubs. And so the part that he takes is the part over the grubs, and then the grub part gets given to the person you want to control. I think he has a couple of kids tested out first. Um, and then, yeah, we get Chris, who becomes a victim of this while out on a date. And I mean, if you're missing the date rape metaphor here, you're blind as a freaking bat. Okay, so that is in there about messaging, about gaslighting, about abusive relationships, and that's all in the first like third of this film type of thing. Up until he leaves her. That even then, it's one of those things to where until she meets Jeff, up until that point, there's kind of I guess the word, I don't know if the word would be allegory or metaphor, whatever, for, abusive relationship, basically dealing with it, and then coming to reality and going, oh crap, this is the type of person I was. When you meet Jeff, they do a great setup as well, to where you said, you get that Jeff is probably a victim. Even before they show the little scar on his ankle later on, you're like, yeah, the way he's talking to that, he's also bad. You know? But you've got to let this film play out, because as it was played out, I'm like, where are you going with this? You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's not obvious exactly where are you going with this until you meet the guy with the pigs. And then when you see the guy with the pigs, you're like, oh. And then it does what not all artsy films, as we say, does, it actually takes it somewhere and starts doing something so that you're like, okay, I'm intrigued now. We're not just going to let this lay, you know, because you know what I'm saying, right? Ian? Sometimes films like this, they're just going to let it lay. You're not going to get that resolution you actually get in this film. They just kind of let it, oh, we're just going to leave it ambiguous and we'll just play it out for the rest of the film. And,
Well, yeah, I think there's still plenty of ambiguity.
mhm,
I mean, Andrew Sensenig, who plays the sampler, who's the guy who's basically creating or at least harvesting these grubs. He also works in the entertainment industry as an audio sampler. He creates basically like CDs and records of sound effects for commercial use, and we get to see him out in the field like scraping rocks against like
mhm,
drain pipes and stuff to get these cool effects, and he's sort of creating music. He's also got this crazy setup out in a trailer in the middle of a field with these speakers surrounding the trailer that he blasts at full volume, and you get the feeling almost that the vibrations are pulling the worms
mhm,
up from the earth, and then he harvests the larvae. It's fascinating, but he only has, I think, maybe one or two lines in the entire movie,
mhm,
and I think those are incidental of him like talking to someone else. I mean, of course, who else is he going to be talking to? But it's not conversations with other characters revealing plot. It's
mhm,
almost incidental, like I gotta go talk to the milkman or some shit. um but you get this really strange portrait of loneliness. I mean, he is the villain of the piece, but it's almost like a sort of weird high functioning autism where he doesn't quite understand people, so he wants to literally try and get inside of them in order to understand who they are, because what he's creating, these drugs, that's like downstream from his operation. He's got these pigs, which uh, I'm not exactly sure exactly what he does with these glands of these pigs with the victims that show up, on his little ranch. But he takes a part of the people, puts them into the pig, and then keeps the pigs, and he's able to kind of check in on the humans when they go away through this connection. It's all very strange, but they never sit down and hammer it out with a scientific explanation. You kind of have to infer everything. But yeah, the people who are using these drugs, worms on the street for nefarious purposes and to steal money and stuff, that's, there's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for what he's doing either, but you don't get
mhm.
a feeling that he's like, oh, I'm going to take over the world by controlling minds. He's looking for something else, but he's doing it in the most harmful way possible.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I was thinking, and they don't explore it with him. So you're right; they do leave it a little ambiguous. The sampler, at first I got the impression that maybe he was the alpha grub or alpha worm of some sort. You know what I mean? He's the one because what he does, what these worms do, is they stay inside people's bodies after they're drugged. They're still in their bodies because we see that brutal scene where she tries to cut it out and it doesn't.
Well, they multiply, it looks
And
like,
they
because
multiply, right?
yeah.
And then he takes part of those worms out. There's this weird crank thing that he did with pulling like the worm, which doesn't want to leave the body, and put it in the pig. And I love that idea of once he does that transfer, he can touch the pig and see where those people are. And
Yeah.
I love how Shane did that. I thought it was subtle yet enough to where you get the idea of what's going on. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, this one of the things I'd forgotten about this movie is how great the special effects are in this.
mhm,
I mean, they're not like crazy big Hollywood budget, but they're used effectively. I mean, there's digital effects, but used in a practical manner. For example, when Chris wakes up and she realizes these things are moving under her skin, as do we. They're digital effects of these, rippling under the skin, these little slugs that we've seen in other kinds of movies. Um, but she tries to cut them out. They don't. It doesn't get graphic, but you definitely get the idea. You get the surgery scene with the pig. You get a decomposing pig in a river later on at various states of decomposition. You have all these different shots of what it's like inside human and pig bodies as these worms are making their way through. That looks practical. I still don't understand how they did it, because it looks like they actually
mhm.
took a camera inside these bodies. It's just what you can do on a low budget film with a lot of imagination, passion, and heart.
Mhm.
It's, this is a movie I would recommend to anybody who wants to get into making movies, especially, indie sci-fi kind of things.
Well, yeah, and what's also great about it is it doesn't hold your hand, but it doesn't get too obscure to where you can't follow what's everything's going. In the beginning,
You have to pay
you just
attention
have to
though.
pay
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah.
You just have to pay attention, but at the same time, it's not to where they're walking you through every steps, but at the same time, if you pay attention, you'll be able to piece things together. Especially when we start to get into the third act and how Jeff and Chris start putting things together because of a book, Walden, which plays a big part in the reveal and putting it together. And that's what I liked too, is that the characters aren't completely oblivious. They're aware something is off with them. They're not quite sure what's going on. They're connected to the pigs in a way which is interesting because they explore motherhood and infertility in a way, the subject of infertility, because Chris at one point thinks she's pregnant, but then she's not. And in fact, they come to find out that she possibly was a victim of stage 3 cancer. Um, and another condition, which she's like, wait, no, never. But then we find that the pig had babies. So she was feeling the maternal instinct because the pig had babies. And then we find out that the babies, while at first seems random, actually is connected to the whole sampler's plan. And it brings it back around at the end, which we finally discover, of this plant company who, at first, when we're first introduced to it, it's where they get the grubs from. It seems a bit innocent to where it's kind of random that there's these blue plants and the one guy who gaslights and infects Chris, basically. How he finds these grubs, you're like, oh, he's acting independently until the end. I love the reveal at the end when the baby pigs unfortunately get drowned, but they see how that's connected, and suddenly the flowers, and I'm like, why are we staying on the flowers so much? And then the flower people show up and I'm like, oh.
Right, and there are these blue flowers, and that's the other thing is, and I haven't really dug too much into the making of this movie, but when we first see the grubs, it's a very subtle difference. They just look like whitish yellow, like maggots, right?
Like waxworms, yeah, maggots, yeah.
Right, but there is a very subtle blue tint, almost like a vein or a
Mhm.
stain or something on the body, and I wondered, is that a special effect, or is there an actual worm that looks like this, and they kind of embellished it later on? I don't know, and that's one of the things that's so great about this movie because later, when with the pigs and everything, these white plants that are kind of growing out in the field, some of them start to turn blue, and that's when the plant people show up and they cultivate them. And then later on, after what happens, spoiler alert, the sampler ends up dead, and his whole operation kind of gets revealed to his numerous victims. And they sort of start reclaiming the land and the pigs and all that. The plants turn white. In fact, the plant people come back, and they're like, kind of without saying anything, like, where the fuck are our blue plants?
They're wondering where the blue plants are. We see the guy and his helpers suddenly like, oh crap, where are the grubs? Where can we get the grubs? And then you realize that, yeah, the sampler is the guy who puts the pigs together. They have the babies. He deliberately tosses the babies because they're used as breeding for the chemical or whatever you want to talk it, the natural whatever that ends up causing the grubs and the blue plants, the full circle. I loved how it came for full circle, because some films like this, and that's where I was kind of going before, was not all films that are like this, that artistic, come full circle to where you don't necessarily have that connection to the beginning, but he manages to do that here and do it very well, to where you're like, oh, okay, that all makes sense now.
The best way I can describe it is, and we talked about Knight of Cups a couple of years ago, the
Yes.
Terrence Malick
Mhm.
movie. If you have trouble with Terrence Malick, I think Upstream Color might be a good way to go, because there is a
Mhm.
lot of kind of visual poetry, and this is more so than in a Malick movie. You really have to pay attention to what's going on visually, because there's a lot of cuts, a lot of seemingly random images that after the hour and a half is up, if you think back, you'll be like, oh, it really is all connected. None of this is like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm just going to shoot some trees and oh, I'm going to shoot this river. No, it all means something. A lot of it means stuff in Malick's movies too, but it's a lot. It's headier and kind of more ethereal. Whereas this is goes back to like, you really think about, wow, this guy plotted all of this stuff out. Like you
Mhm.
feel like this is all in the screenplay or the short story or whatever, wherever it came from.
Yeah, and here Shane is using the visual medium to tell the story because we have blocks of time that pass that you don't quite realize pass until you get a detail like Chris and Jeff. They talk about getting married. We don't get any wedding scene. We don't get anything, but we do get a shot of the hands with the ring at some
Mm-hmm.
point. But they never come out and show any wedding picture or anything. We see them move into a house together briefly, and we see both on their hands the ring, especially as things start coming into focus that something else is going on in their life. Especially with the Walden thing. I actually loved the Walden reveal. That the reveal where they start putting things together. I actually got excited. I'm like, what the hell? I like this film has kind of been this subtle artsy thing, and all of a sudden I'm kind of excited for them that they're actually figuring this out because they make you feel sympathetic for these characters who have been violated and who are still being violated by the sampler, who's just peeking in on anyone's life he wants to by touching the pig, which is creepy.
It's again, that's one way to read it, as creepy, but he's not. I don't know exactly the extent to which he has, control when they're in that kind
Mhm.
of pig phase. Like, we only see him ever watching these people, and he's not physically projecting his body there. I think that's just the language of the film
Well,
where
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
he's checking in
Mhm.
on folks, it looks like he's
Right,
standing right next to them, but we just get the feeling
right.
that he can just kind of see them and find out, figure out what they're doing. But he's not we don't see him using that for kind of ill advantage. He's not like
No,
molesting anybody or
no.
attacking them or making them do like nefarious things, unlike the people like downstream from
Right.
his operation are doing. So yeah, again, I think there's something. He's a very disturbed person, but I got the feeling like this is his only way that he can connect with people. I mean, you think about what he
Right.
does. He has a very solitary job. He lives out in the middle of nowhere, so he doesn't really have a lot of human contact, possibly because he's just so, like, socially awkward. He doesn't know how to people, as the kids say today.
Well, and that's what led me to believe maybe he was why I said it was alpha grub or whatever, or alien or someone different inside or controlling this person, and he is using the pigs to experience other people because he can't experience himself, whether or not he's just a guy, or maybe there's something more going on inside creature possessing him, maybe, or something. you know you
It's
don't
it's
think
an
so?
it's no, I don't think this movie is that level of science fiction.
Oh.
Um, I'm not saying that it couldn't be. I'm just saying that I think if it were, then we would have gotten some kind of information about, you know, he gets shot at the end. There would have been
Hmm.
some like white blood or something like that. I don't think that what I liked about this is one of the many things I like about it is the science fiction of it is
Hmm.
based in nature. It feels
Right.
like this is something that this guy or someone he knew, it maybe was passed on or something, they discovered something that nobody else knows about. Like a
Right.
new species of worm, that if you do this, because you have to think about, like, how the hell did he figure out he could do the thing with the pigs and the flowers and putting it in pills and the mind control? Like, how long has this been going on?
Right.
And it's a seemingly natural occurrence. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and like it's
and
and
again, no one explains it. Like, we just have to
no.
think about it ourselves. Yeah.
Well, and you don't need it's one of those things where, and I know that's a popular thing, and especially among many movie watchers now. Well, they didn't explain this. Well, they explain enough. Well, you don't get an origin story for the sampler. You get enough explanation of what's going on. You get characters who figure it out along with the audience. And Amy Simons, wow, I love her in this film. There's this wonderful scene near the climax, as we mentioned. He doesn't. People don't see him as he's peeking into their lives through the pig. But once Jeff and Chris figure out the Walden connection in this wonderful moment to where they're reading the same page and she's reciting it from memory, but she's also diving underwater. And as she comes up, she's continuing the page that he is starting to read. There's this wonderful editing and interaction. Uh, but there's a moment where they bait him. They bait this guy. They know something's going on, and she shows up and they're sitting at a table, and suddenly the sampler shows up to peek in on Jeff, and she's standing or sitting there, and she gives this wonderful look. And it's funny because I'm watching this going, oh, have her look up, have her look up. And she does, which freaks the sampler out. And then we find out that, oh yeah, no, this has been kind of a ruse, and she's actually at the pig farm. um and I loved that whole how all of that played out was so well done, because just the way it comes together, it was fitting within the film, and it's a wonderful moment in the movie, because there's some justice going on. Uh, but just the way it's handled, this whole film is subtle, and like you said, yeah, it is kind of slow cinema. Only it's 90 minutes, but stuff's there for you to pick up on if you pay attention.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's sort of the anti-Hollywood movie of a
Yeah.
film like of this type, because typically what you'd see is that climax, but the guy would give some kind of a plea or a speech or like, this is why I did it. The woman definitely would be like, how could you? And you stole my life, and this is, motherfucker, and then she'd like shoot him or something. But there's not a whole lot of dialogue in this movie. I mean, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but if there's 20 minutes of actual dialogue in this movie, I'd be shocked. A lot of it is
Mhm.
told visually and through performances, minus people actually talking to each other. You get a lot more in looks, like you said, and in actions. It's yeah, I'm torn because I have to be very careful here, especially because we're live. But Shane Carruth, it is alleged, is not very nice person in real life. He and Amy Simons were together for quite a while, and
Mhm.
according to what I'll say are court documents, restraining orders, there was a lot of domestic troubles, shall we say, for a good part of the relationship. And it's ironic watching it through that lens. Everything is kind of terrible for Chris until Jeff shows up, and it's
Yeah.
like, wow.
Yeah.
If that's not backwards.
Yeah, yeah. See, and I didn't know about that behind the scenes drama exactly. I followed up on it, and that is unfortunate for it, because this film, yeah, it's a subdued sci-fi thriller. It's subdued, but it's there. It's got the elements, but it's handled in such a interesting manner. I don't want to say soft, because that's a bad word. But it's I'm not sure what the word. You know what I was trying to say though. It's not a soft thriller, but there's a lot going on. It's just not heightened energy. It's
Right. It grabs you, and it's just, I think it's even more impactful because it's not hitting you over the head.
Mhm.
Like, again, once you get on this thing's wavelength and you figure out how the story is being told, it's, I don't know. The first couple of times I watched it, I felt like really amazed that someone could portray these relationships in this movie in such a way that was so kind of insightful and in
Mhm.
tune to like, oh, this is what it feels like to be abused and to be an abuser and to take advantage of someone. And this is how it feels to come out of that kind of a relationship or to be in the middle of that relationship. And now, I mean, of course, nobody knows all the details, but I'm like, well, unfortunately, it feels like they say write what you know.
Yeah, I
And
guess. Yeah, that's true.
what a price. But no, it's I avoided stepping in it a few years ago because I actually interviewed Amy Steinmetz when she was in the Pet Cemetery remake,
Yeah.
and I had wanted to ask her about like Shane Carruth and Upstream Color, and ooh, wasn't that how awesome was that? But
And then you're like,
this is before I knew anything about what had happened, but it was also right in the middle of a lot of what was going on. I'm like, yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, I thought she was really good in the Pet Cemetery remake. She was also in Alien Covenant briefly.
Hmm.
She was the girl who got blown up
Yeah.
after running from the lab. Yeah, and strangely enough, Andrew Senseneg, the sampler, he reached out to me on Twitter like probably 10 years ago because I think he read my review of the movie and thought it was really nice.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so
Nice.
all these orbiting connections to this movie, and I'm torn because at one point I was like, oh, I would love to talk to Shane Carruth, and now I don't know what the hell
You
I'd say.
you don't know what you would say. Yeah, I mean, this is interesting sci-fi. This is some people would say cerebral sci-fi, but that's also usually used in a negative way, and I don't think so here. Um, the sci-fi and the rules that they build around it were interesting enough, and they give you enough so it's explained. The blue color and even tragic. It makes it kind of shocking, and that's the thing is the film plays out in a even tone, but you're presented with shocking visuals, but you don't get like music stinger, or you don't get like a build up to like more fast edits or some kind of thing, or like you said, a lot of exposition. But when you realize where the blue flowers come from and the effect of the baby pigs on the people who worms are in the parents of the baby pigs and the effect on them, you're just like, wow, it just your brain starts to go, you know. It to put it mildly, and you know how I love to read. This is this this is like a visual book, is the way it plays
Yeah.
out in many respects. The way the events play out and everything, it's almost like how you have audiobooks. I would say this is a visual book in that it's just the pages, the words on a page, and how you take everything or interpret things is up to you, what you bring to the film when you watch it.
I agree.
Mhm.
I also think that because there's some movies where that happens
Mm.
and it's almost a cop out, like, oh, it's more about what you bring to the story. It doesn't have to make
Mm.
sense. Usually when I hear that, that's code for me for the screenwriter didn't know what the hell they were doing. And they're relying on the fact, like, well, what do you think it meant? I'm like, motherfucker, I paid you to, entertain me. In this case, I think Shane Carruth really thought everything else. I think
Mhm.
that he had everything mapped out and then selectively went in and cut out giant chunks of information.
Mhm.
And then he told the story without, I mean, he didn't take out things that, would fail to connect other pieces.
Mhm.
He just said, you don't need to know about that. It all makes sense. If you think about it, I know what the answer is. And you probably know what the answer is, but I'm not going to tell you if you're right.
What surprised me in it was because we knew he recorded sound, but considering his pig hobby, it almost felt like that was just another hobby of his, the sound collecting. Like he didn't actually do anything at first because you weren't quite aware that he had the label right away. It's not
Right.
presented right away. It just, you think, oh, he collects worms, spies on people through pigs, which sounds weird, and just records audio for his own sensations, which is again why I was figuring he was maybe an alien or of some kind of creature itself inhabiting this person or whatever, and just looking to experience new things. And that's why he was recording the odd sounds and mixing them, and also touching the pigs to see what people are doing. That's the way I took it, until we see his label later on, and we see that he's got a number of CDs released. I mean,
Well, it makes you wonder which came first, the sound recording or the grubs,
right.
because if the hypothesis is right and he's using the sound waves to raise these things out of the ground, did he discover these on accident, like when he was working
Mhm.
one day, like, hey, what's up with these worms? What if I did something with these in pigs? I don't know. But yeah, just all these questions, and the answers don't necessarily mean anything to the plot of the movie, but it's just fun stuff to think about. Get your own imagination going, which I think is a hallmark of great science fiction. Um, One thing I do want to mention
Yeah, go ahead.
before we finish talking about Amy Seimetz, she is also a filmmaker in her own right, and she made one of my favorite films of 2020 called She Dies Tomorrow, and it's an independent horror film. It's very kind of quirky and weird, and it basically it was what I like to think of as the first non-pandemic pandemic movie, because it's about a
Mm.
social contagion. Basically, it's sort of like The Ring, where people become convinced that they're about to die or they're going to die tomorrow,
Hmm.
and then if they tell other people about it, they become convinced that they're going to die tomorrow.
Mm.
And then people just start dying. And it's like, what the hell is going on here? But yeah, it's on Hulu and some other places, but um, yeah, it's some really great stuff.
Yeah, they came up as a recommended with this film when I rented it from Google, because I had to rent it off of Google because apparently it's not on Amazon. I had
There
there's a
there's a
copy on Google as
there's
well
a
though.
crappy YouTube transfer.
Yeah.
And I started watching that. I'm like, it was just a little bit too washed out. So I rented it from YouTube.
Oh, you
Um,
did. I did. That's what I did as well. It was far better. They were playing with it probably to get around the copyright, so they keeping things a bit out of focus and some things, and it was just weird watching it. I'm like, nah, there's something off. I'll just rent it.
yeah. And
It's only like $3.
well, it sucks because like 10 minutes after I pressed play, I was like, you know what? I keep forgetting to buy this damn Blu-ray. I think the Blu-ray's on sale, so it's like, well, I'm just
Oh,
gonna
well, there you go.
I'll pick it up, but I hate that when I'm watching something I just spent like $4 on or whatever. I'm like, well, I'm about to spend another 12 or whatever it is, so I
Mm.
just, damn it.
There's, and there's also things you could look into, the way it explores things like, say, mental health.
Mm,
I for me, personally, I took a little bit of interpretation for mental health when you have these two people meet, and they've been through a traumatic experience, either however you want to take it, abuse or whatnot, and they're trying to have a relationship, a stable relationship, and it's tested. We see it tested among themselves. And it doesn't stay on it too long. It doesn't ever get too heavy with their relationship, but we do see that there is a conflict in there occasionally with it, with them arguing. There's a scene in particular where they're arguing. And I took that as kind of an implication of, well, you've got two people who've been through some shit, and they're trying to have a quote unquote stable or normal or however you want to play it relationship, and it's tested every so.
yeah, I mean that's the yeah, there's the trauma of what happened to both of them. I mean, that's the mental health thing. I think is a good option. I mean, everyone's kind of has their own baggage, and you bring that into a relationship, you never know how it's going to go. But the specific kind of trauma that they've been through, I mean, you have their whole being has been violated, and
Mhm.
not only violated, but violated kind of publicly to the point where they were compelled to like steal from people that they know and people that they worked for. They lost everything. So how can they trust other people again? How can they trust another person? And you bring that into a new relationship, it's like, yeah, it's going to be a bit touch and go. But Ironically, there's a beautiful relationship story at the heart of this movie that was made by these people.
It is a bit ironic now that real world stuff, but at least on camera, in front of the camera, they have a relationship that comes through, and they help other people. Then you get
Hmm.
that metaphor there to where they start to discover the other people who have been victims of this, and they help them. And I loved that, how it took it to that scope, because I thought we were just going to stick with these two people, but no, these folks actually, then Jeff and Chris, want to help other people, and I liked that quite a bit.
I did too, and I don't know if it's subtle marketing or whatever, but it worked on me because when there's that montage of random people going to their mailboxes, and there's these like brown boxes inside, and they open it up,
Yeah.
and there's a copy of Walden. Yeah, I paused the movie. And I went to Amazon, ordered a copy of Walden because I haven't read it since I was in high school. I'm like, it's a fucking great book. I need to read this again.
I, have you taken a grub recently, Ethan?
Um, no, no, but I will probably never order from Grubhub again. I just put that together, and wow, ugh, no,
Yeah, Grubhub, yeah.
yeah.
No wonder I keep blacking out after I order from them. I don't understand. I order from them, an hour later, suddenly I have fast food that's been eaten, and I don't remember eating it. What the hell? Uh, so, and there's a lot of artsy things going on in here, but if you've seen Primer, especially, because I enjoy Primer, but it has similar thought out things. So Primer is far more uh obscure, I would say, in its approach to what it's presenting than this one. This Between these two, this is far more linear, I will say, well, for obvious reasons, uh but this one plays out, the narrative plays out a lot more cohesive, I will say, than Primer, to where Primer really kind of gets out there. Yeah, don't ever do a double feature of Primer and Pie. You'll
Oh,
you'll your brain will be melted by the end of the night.
yeah. I would probably want to put a drill in my head after that double feature. Jesus Christ.
That will scramble your brain quite a bit. But yeah, and again, I had this conversation with folks on the podcast I was on, a guest on, where we talked about 65, the Back to the Frame Rate podcast, which I was on. And we talked about 65. And I know I didn't drop a review of it because I was trying to put my words together for it. And I just left it for the podcast. Uh, but that film, it's one of those things where that was only 90 minutes. And I was like, yes, a 90-minute film. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that was a 90-minute film. Uh, which
Are
is
you saying
refreshing.
it was a waste of time, or it felt much longer?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Whereas this one is a 90-minute film, but for the type of film it is, you would expect it to be longer.
Yeah.
Is where I was eventually going with it. Long trip, I know, too late. But yeah, it's that the story, it's evenly paced, but the type of story it is that we've gotten in the past, you would expect it to be longer, but it doesn't. And I'm glad it isn't, because I think if it gets longer, you fall asleep. If you had extra added scenes, you either fall asleep or you take away from what you're trying to get your audience to start chewing on.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird because I feel like Shane Carruth is kind of low key canceled in that he's not a household name. But if anyone were to say, "Hey, let's have an Upstream Color revival at the Music Box," there might be some problems. Uh, but I would love to see this movie on the big screen.
Mhm.
I think this
Yes.
is a good in theater art house movie because it's not just like pretty shots of people talking and like trees and cityscapes. I mean, there's some really great trippy stuff going on here that I think you could really get immersed in. And yeah, it's 90 minutes of not a whole lot, quote unquote, going on, especially compared to a big Hollywood blockbuster. I haven't seen 65, but I mean, there's dinosaurs and guns and Adam Driver. So I imagine there's more, quote unquote, to it
That's
than
what they
is
should
in
have
this
called
movie.
it. That's what they should
What?
have called it. Dinosaurs, Guns, and Adam Driver. That's what they should have called that movie.
A double feature with Cocaine Bear. There you go.
There you go. There you go.
Um, but no, it's just, yeah, I guess I'm just trying to say, like, it sounds strange to say, yeah, go see this kind of movie in the theater, but I think it really would play well if, as long as you don't tell people who made it.
Well, what's interesting is to the film itself. Normally, I'm not a big fan. Excuse me. I'm not a big fan of films where the filmmaker did everything,
Hmm.
because usually you'll watch the film and you go, yeah, you should have had another person like edit this, or you should have probably had someone go over this with you before you released it, type of thing. Because there's usually one aspect of it that falters greatly, that you look at this going, yeah, this was all done by the director, and it shouldn't have. But in this one, I didn't get that feeling ever. I didn't even realize just how much he was involved in cinematography, music, even, which the music is very subtle in this. It plays underneath. It's beautiful, but it haunting. But at the same time, it's just underneath, to where sometimes you don't realize it's there, but it's there. Um, yeah, he hits a lot of the right notes, no pun intended.
And even, he even stars in it. That's the thing, is like
Yeah.
he's kind of got this like an LA version of Lyle Lovett thing going on. But it totally works. And again, I feel strange saying this, but like, I wish there were more filmmakers. I wish he was doing more, or had a chance to do more, just from an artistic standpoint, not necessarily from a personal standpoint. But when I think of auteur filmmakers, I'm like, where are they nowadays? Well, we have one kind of in our midst, and he's made two pictures, one of which I love and one of which I need to revisit again, because I don't think I was that impressed with Primer. But I probably just got confused because I was tired, so I gotta give it another shake.
Yeah, primer, you got to definitely be awake for sure. And I'm not even going to say I understand everything that went on in primer. I understood everything that happened in Upstream Color, which was more surprising, in all honesty, than I thought it would be, given the type of film that I knew it was. So yeah, it's a deep yet not film. It's one that I think people should see. It's I would say my final thought with it is you should see it and rent it. And if you're looking for something a little different, because it's a sci-fi story in here, it's got a lot of great moments, and it keeps you intrigued enough to where you won't fall asleep, though not a whole lot of action is going on.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, it really is built. I mean, Shane Carruth is pretty good in this movie, but this really is a showcase for Amy Seimetz,
mhm.
and I think for Andrew Cincenig, because he does a lot with, like I said, he barely says anything in this movie, but yeah, it's a great performance piece. If you're trying to figure out how to convey character without dialogue,
Mhm.
this movie has so much to recommend for it, like low budget special effects, performances, tight sci-fi writing without being ham-handed. This is a primer, or a primer, I guess, for
Oh,
how to get
nice.
into the movie biz on
Nice.
your own. Yeah.
Nice primer. I like that. And surprisingly enough, snubbed at the Oscars.
Was it even talked about? I mean, this is like, I know
Mhm.
this was like on critics' radar and stuff, but not like I don't
Mhm.
was it I don't even
It
know
was
what
at the
studio
Milwaukee it was
released
at
this.
the Milwaukee Film Festival. Hey,
Oh, there you go.
Milwaukee represent. But no, and Gotham Awards, it was a nominee anyway. So, it is one of those things to where um yeah, it didn't even get the Oscar, which you would look a film like this and you go, no, this is Oscar. Like, this is one of those to where it'd be one of those films that nobody watched yet. It's up for a number of categories for Oscars.
But it needs a studio to push it.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
That's yeah.
I could see this being the type of movie that a studio would put out, but it's like so many other movies. that fall into that category that don't get put out by major studios, so no one even knows to fucking go see it.
Oh, if you'll indulge me here, because
Of course.
uh, we know IMDb has wonderful critics on
Oh
it
no.
and wonderful comments
Oh
on
no.
it. It's such a wonderful pool of folks with even keel opinions and such.
Mark, I
Uh,
got preemptive chills just now. That's what that shudder was. Let's
so
bring it on.
Upstream Color, here's a user review for Upstream Color. I won't say who, but the title is Self-Indulgent, Incomprehensible Insult to the Audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Upstream Color is by far one of the absolute worst films I've ever seen. The movie is, and this is being nice, completely incomprehensible as a narrative work of film. It is nothing more than a bunch of random shots edited together with music and some occasional meaningless dialogue. It reminds me of the video tests people post on Vimeo when they're testing out their new still camera video recording features. Wow. Wow. I don't know what Shane Carruth was going for other than satisfying his own selfish need to vomit out this horrible tasting gallon of cryptic bile, but it certainly wasn't to try and entertain any human being with a normally functioning brain. IMDb, you always provide the greatest entertainment in your reviews.
Look, I told you that right around the time that this movie came out, I can't read those movie reviews anymore. It's because I'm guilty of writing stuff like that for movies that I've later gone back and watched and fallen in love with. Terrence Malick, I mentioned earlier, Tree of Life. I quote unquote famously ripped that movie to shreds when it came out, and then I watched it a couple years ago, and I finally got it. So maybe anonymous IMDb commenter, you should go back and watch watch Upstream Color. Maybe our conversation is even giving you some things to think about, because we did not just spend nearly an hour talking about a film that makes absolutely no sense.
No, it's, and it's all how you approach a film. I think, I was talking about this with someone else earlier. I'm like, it's all, and we mentioned it earlier in this podcast, is what you bring to the film, and also I think what you're looking for in a film. It's not, I will say Upstream Color is not going to be for everyone. It's not that it's a bad film. It's just that if you're looking for something that's going to be entertainment that spoon feeds it out for you, which there's nothing wrong with that, this is not your film. Okay. This is just not the film for that. This is one that, as we mentioned, you got to pay attention. You can't just have it in the background, and you can't just sit there and go, turn your brain off to it, because otherwise it could come across that way.
And that's the thing, is I think you're hitting on something, is turning your brain off almost deliberately. Like, if I can't figure out what's going on in the first 5 minutes, this movie's dumb and I'm not gonna, I'm just not gonna engage. Well, okay, I got to give you props if you watch the entire film, if you go in with that attitude and not just like turn it off. But you also have to kind of open yourself up to it. I mean, there are plenty of movies that I kind of hinted at where they're deliberately ambiguous, where there is really nothing going on at the center of it. But this is not
Malik.
one of those films. No, not Terrence Malick.
I'm sorry.
No.
You and I, we will have to have different opinions on Malik. I'm not sold. Sorry. No. Tree of Life. Ow. Ow. I paid money for that movie.
I would recommend going back and watching it again, because that is something that you cannot say about Malick, is that he does not have any good ideas. I'm not saying that all of his films are great, but they are, I would say, equally on par with what Shane Carruth is doing in his pictures. It's just that you have to dig a little bit deeper.
Okay, I will give you that. I will give you that. But Tree of Life. Yeah, when I saw
look, I'm there with you, man. I did not get it. I was angry when I first saw that in 2011, but I went back and I watched it. I think it was for the 10th anniversary or something a couple of years ago, because I think I talked about it on a podcast with Sujua and maybe Matt Zoller sites.
Hmm.
And I may have even watched the extended cut, which is like the theatrical is 3 hours and
Ooh,
the extended is like
wow.
4 or some nonsense. But
Wow.
it flew right by.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll revisit it. I don't know. 90 minutes of this I can handle. 4 hours, no. Though I will watch Gettysburg, and that is like
That's like 8 hours or something.
oh,
Right?
well, there is an 8-hour cut. I'm still kicking myself for not getting the big extended cut of it. There was a box set that they did with that and Gods and Monsters, which was the big extended cut of it. But it was 4 hours in the theater. I didn't see it in the theater, but there was a 6-hour cut and an 8-hour, I think.
Because Gettysburg, that's the one with Jeff Daniels, right?
Yeah, there's Jeff Daniels, Sam Elliott, pretty much
And
all
from
of them.
1993 or 94. I did see that in the theater. My dad took me. I remember to go see that. And
Really?
that was my first. No, it was like my second really long movie in theater. The first one was Lawrence of Arabia. I think he took me to see that when I was 11, and that's a testament to that movie. I was an 11-year-old kid watching that long ass movie in a not so comfortable theater, and I was hooked. I remember liking Gettysburg, but I wasn't as knocked out as my dad. But it was 27 years ago.
Yeah, my dad really loved Gettysburg. I enjoyed it as well. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it when it came to cable and video. I did not see it in the theater. I remember the big deal because it had an intermission, and people were talking about that online, in the newspaper, and on TV, and not necessarily online. They were talking about how this film's got an intermission. Wow, that's weird. Taking it back old school. No, it's because it's so long and that and no, I that's a film that I really enjoy, even though it's very long. Not just for Jeff Daniels, but because I'm also a Sam Elliott stan. I love Sam Elliott. And I'll listen to him read ingredients to Twinkies. so there you have it.
Wait, real quick.
Yeah.
You've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, right?
A number of times. Yeah.
Okay.
I have the soundtrack to it. Yeah.
Okay. I can never remember who's seen what, so no offense, but that has to be one of the all-time great intermission cuts ever. I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about, but it's the bit where the astronauts think they're being all clever by going into a pod and like mouthing to each other, and fucking you see Hal, the eye mounted on the wall, and just close-ups of the lips and then Hal, and it keeps getting closer and closer and closer. You're like, he can read lips, and then boom, intermission. Oh my God, so good.
Yeah, that's a movie that I have to be in the right mood to watch.
You mean Awake?
Yeah, I need to have some no-dos with me on that one.
No, I'm saying that there is no bad time to watch 2001. I am 2001 stan over here. I'll watch it right now. No,
mad props to you. You enjoy that. I have to be in the right mood for that film. But for Upstream Color, I was all in, and I wasn't quite sure going into it, especially given the trailer and all that. But yeah, I was hooked, and I dig it. I dig sci-fi like this. This is why I like indie films. I like alternative approaches. I recommend it. I think Ian here recommends it as well.
A+, yes.
Yeah. And so there you have it, folks. Hope it wet your whistle to go seek it out. You will have to rent it on the YouTube. It's not out really anywhere else, or just buy the disc. It's probably fairly cheap, especially DVD. And yeah, it's indie cinema and sci-fi that's a little heady, but not too heady to where you gets lost in the weeds. And now it is a Perfect 10 episode, and therefore we go to the Wheel of Random. Yes, the Wheel of Random. That's how we're picking next month's film, which will be a Perfect 10 film and obviously spark the theme for next month. So let's spin the wheel and see what we get for April. Round and around, round she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. It's going. And oh my God, we're going from Upstream Color to Stoker. Oh, whoa. Alrighty then. not sure if I'm legally able to put together a theme based off of Stoker without being called by certain individuals.
Well, help me out here, Mark. I have never seen Stoker, and I don't even know if I know what it's about. So set it up for me. What is Stoker?
Okay, Stoker. Let me pull it up just to make sure I got it correct here. Um, yeah, this is going to be an awkward film, and it's got a great cast though. After India's father dies, her uncle Charlie, whom she never knew existed, comes to live with her and her unstable mother. She comes to suspect this mysterious, charming man has ulterior motives and becomes increasingly infatuated with him.
So there's a little bit of
A little bit of
a
Lolita worked into this.
I was going to say we could talk Lolita.
Mm.
You could also work in if you want to attract all of the internet audience. How about Larry Clark's Kids?
Oh, yeah. You see, and as much as I could probably put together, I'll have to think about this and tread lightly because it's not so much that I can't come up with films. It's how much do I want to oppress myself for a month?
Well, we'll just do 5-minute episodes. That'll be fun.
We'll be good. I think I think I'll be able to handle that without needing some serious psychological help. But it's got Mia Wasikowska in it. It's got Nicole Kidman, Matthew Good, Dermot Mulroney is in it.
Last
Mulroney.
seen in Scream 6.
Yeah. So,
Yay.
but a younger one. It's an interesting film. I remember I've watched this once. It is dark, and it's by Park Chan Wook. So,
okay.
So there you go. So yeah, it's by Park. So yeah, that's what we have to look forward to next month for our Perfect 10 episode. The gentleman, we talked about one of his films earlier, Snowpiercer. So it'll be interesting to talk about this one, which was, I think, well, I mean, it was 10 years ago. Obviously, he's made stuff since, but I remember this one being a bit controversial. So I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are on it and our audience as well. Hope you've enjoyed this episode on Upstream Color and are excited for us to talk about this dark film Stoker. And I will have to decide what I want the theme to be next month.
Maybe you skip the theme for this one.
I might just skip a theme for that month. We'll have to see how much I want to test the waters. So with that, as always, it's now the license to shill to my good friend and right-hand man here, Mr. Ian Simmons. Go ahead, sir. The floor is yours.
Why, thank you. I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com and also on YouTube. If you look up Kicking the Seat, you'll find interviews and movie reviews and critics roundtables and all that good stuff. And I'm here every Tuesday talking to Mark and
well, Mondays now.
Mondays. Oh, yeah. See, we're so new on the Monday
We're
thing.
so
But I'm
new.
still in
Yeah,
my
I
head.
know.
It's still Tuesday. Plus, I have no idea what day it is. So you're lucky I showed up, pal. No. But yeah, and yeah, so check it out, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. But yeah, this is why I get out of bed on Monday mornings. Well, also my paycheck, but
your paycheck. I hope so.
Yeah, to watch movies so I can talk with Mark in the evenings. This is one of my favorite things I get to do, man. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. I look forward to it as well. And now that it's on Mondays, it's a great way to start the week. And yes, folks, if you're curious where to find me, not only on specialmarkproductions.com for all your movie man needs, I've got 6 new reviews dropping this week. I have a written review out there I did last week. There's an interview I did with the director of Enter the Dragon, which has dropped. If you didn't notice, on our podcast channel. And I've been fortunate enough and very honored and humbled to be on a number of podcasts recently. I was on, you'll probably agree, Mike Crowley. We were sitting and talking the Last of Us TV show. I've been on Mr. Ian Simmons' podcast here. We were talking of Mandalorian as well as Scream 6. And then I was on another Scream 6 podcast, the horror miser Monty, who's been on the show here. His YouTube channel, which is doing well. He's done some interviews. He did a live stream of the Scream 6 discussion, which I had the pleasure of being part of the panel that he had on. So yeah, and then this just recently, that's going to drop later this week, is a newer podcast from Nathan Sewer, and it's called Back to the Frame Rate. And we got to talk about prehistoric films and such. So I'm just everywhere. I'm like a media whore, I guess you could call it.
You're like a grub that's blossoming into a flower that just gets everywhere.
Blossoming, exploding, whatever you want to say. We'll just leave it at that. And I would just say a good night, everyone.